Welcome to a homegrown family podcast where we grow the produce and the kids. All right, hey everybody. Welcome to a homegrown family podcast. I'm your podcast host, Joe Metler, and today we're looking at talking about processing meat chickens because we just did that this weekend, so why not talk about it while it's fresh on our minds? So today I have my mother again joining us here at the farm, actually, so we're enjoying country living here at the farm here this weekend. And so one of the activities that we did was butcher. And growing up, it was always butchering chickens. It wasn't tamed down to processing meat chickens or meat birds or whatever, but it was always called butchering. Whether it was hogs or chickens or cows, it was just the way it was called. Anyways, some people might think that's a little bit vulgar of a term, but we'll describe the process and then you can kind of determine for yourself. So I have my mom here today, and we're talking about processing meat chickens. And so I guess to start off with, you need to get your birds. This year, my brother David had gotten some birds from somebody he knew that was basically breeding some of his own birds for age or something, right? And then after that, he took care of them when they were small, kind of gave them some starter chick feed. And then after that, we transferred them over to the farm. And then Mom kind of took care of it from there. And so, Mom, what'd you do for taking care of the chickens?
So we switched them from the chick starter, which is more of a kind of a pellet form, to the chick grower. And that's a little bit of a different variety of feed too, a little more protein maybe. And then it's more of a mash powder form. Just put them in a bigger space so they could have more room to roam and grow and not be too crowded. That's about it. Just food and water.
And I know last time we mentioned that the Longhorns were a good type of chicken for egg layers. And so when David was getting these chickens, we wanted to make sure we got ones that were built for meat, right? Now we're going to be a little bit more hardy of a bird. In the past, what we've done is we ordered some different chickens through Hoover's Hatchery out of Iowa, and they'll ship chickens through the mail, and then the same day the chickens arrive at the post office, you got to go pick them up. Otherwise you're probably going to end up with some dead chickens, unfortunately. You can't keep them in the mailroom too long. They get too hot. They don't get food. They don't get water. But the type of chicken that we're looking at getting for these meat birds are the Cornish cross broilers. We just call them broilers, but they're built to be a meatier bird, and typically 6 to 8 pounds, and are not really meant for egg production. They grow quickly. According to the catalog here, it shows it at 6 to 8 weeks old to kind of mature, and it has it at 6 to 8 pounds or so. The ones we butchered here this weekend, we weighed out at the end after we had all the intestines removed and things like that, basically ready to go in the freezer bag. They were basically 9 pounds on average, probably, something like that. So they're a pretty good sized chicken. So looking at the list of supplies that you need, so you have your chickens, you have these broilers that kind of grow quickly, built more for meat. The day that you're going to be processing these birds, you have a list of to-do things that you need or supplies that you need. So why don't you kind of go through a couple of those things you need, Mom?
Sharp knives. Number one.
Number one, sharp knives.
You need a big kettle to boil the water. You need to have a sharp axe or knife, depending upon how you will take off their heads. You need your bags that you're going to freeze them in. Mm-hmm. And freezer bags, not just the storage bags. You have a thicker bag so you don't have any freezer burn,
Well, I'll have sometimes other bags that she uses, but I purchased some 2-gallon freezer bags. Those work pretty well. You might be able to get away with a 1-gallon if they're smaller birds, but 2-gallon, make sure you have enough room that way. You also need a blowtorch. Apart from just feathers, they also have these little hairs sometimes that are kind of just growing in between all the feathers. So you don't want to try to keep those on the birds. You want to be able to get rid of all that extra feathers and hairs and things as much as you can. And then also the tip morning of.
Don't feed your chickens, because otherwise what they call the crop, which is in the neck, that's where the feed goes first. And that's where it's stored, and then it goes down to the intestines and the gizzard and all that. So if you want that empty so you don't have to worry about any feed getting out onto your bird. when you're butchering them. So
yeah, it just keeps it cleaner and less messy.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there's less food in the animal. There's less, chances of cutting, an organ as you're pulling things out or something like that and causing spillage on your bird. Yeah, so we have a couple different steps for this, I guess. The first thing you got to do is you got to round up your birds, right? Whatever kind of a pen you have them in, so that you can easily grab them and then kind of make the process quick. And so the first thing you want to do is probably start boiling your water, right? You don't want to sit there and wait on your water after the heads are removed. You don't want them sitting there at like the hot temperatures and just kind of baking away. So you want to get your water boiling right away. And I could tell you probably a certain temperature, but my mom, we just always boil the big kettle full of water until it's boiling at a rapid boil. And by the time you put it in a 5-gallon pail to bring it out to the outside, it's cooled off a little bit, and you can do, I don't know, what can you do, maybe 10 birds?
Yeah, I'd probably be pushing it. Yeah, around 8 maybe would be good.
Yeah, so we did batches of 7 this weekend. That worked pretty well. By the time you got to the 7th one, the water was getting a little bit more warm, less hot. And so you want to make sure you have boiling water ready to go pretty much, because the decapitating part is probably the most humane. I mean, it's quick, it's fast, and then you just kind of let the blood drain. And so one thing that we do is we take a stump. My parents did a wood boiler stove to help heat their house for ages, and we have just a bigger, larger stump that we use. We sit down and we put 2 nails in there, like your nails with like the bigger heads, like the dime size heads or something like that. That way you have a good little edge on the edge of the nail, so that when you put the chicken's neck in between the nails, and the other individual is pulling that neck tight, so that we have less room for error, I guess. So you kind of know where the neck's at, and then you have that sharp axe, and we usually able to get it in a whack, and then you take the bird and you put her down on the ground and kind of hold it, and then we have to make sure we hold it correctly, right?
Yeah, you got to keep one wing and one leg together with one hand, and then on the other side the same thing. So if you can hold on to their wing and their leg, that way the wings won't be flapping around, because they can flap around pretty hard. They're pretty strong, so you got to be ready. You don't want bruised wings, or sometimes they can break too. So
yeah, so you get a good firm hold, and then once the head is chopped, kind of holding on to it, neck face down, so all the blood goes onto the grass, and then at the same time, another person is typically grabbing another chicken, and that process is continual, and then you only have to hold it there for maybe, 15 seconds to 30 seconds, maybe a minute at most. But you can kind of tell when their twitching is over, and then you release the bird, and then go get another one, and you kind of keep on repeating the process. Yeah, so that part's not always the most fun. I mean, it is a life, and it kind of, it's part of the process of life, though. So, to be able to grow your own food and butcher your own food is definitely a privilege, I guess, that we're allowed to be able to do that in the United States here, and be able to have access to these animals and the land and the food and everything to be able to do that. So we're very fortunate with that, and we do take that seriously. It's not like we're trying to disrespect the animals in any way. This morning we had 7 of them lining up there, and so then after that we have that boiling water with that 5-gallon pail, and then we dip it, and Mom's always been the dipper, so I'll let her go ahead and talk about that. Yep,
so you just put them in head first, and you keep your hands on their legs, so then you can kind of swish them around to make sure that the water kind of gets in underneath their wings, because the wing feathers are the hardest to get out. So once you can kind of dip it and swish them around in that water a little bit, if you can kind of pull them out and test the wing feathers to see if they come out, then they're pretty much done. It doesn't take very long, 30 minutes or 30 seconds to a minute is probably about all it takes. And you don't want to overdo it, because then their skin will get really tender, and when you're taking off the feathers, it could rip. And if you want to keep that bird whole for like a roasting chicken, you want to keep that skin intact if possible, so keeps in the juices of the bird and stuff when you're broiling it. So.
Yeah, and Mom mentioned, keeping chickens whole. So that's what we did mostly this week, was put them in a full 2-gallon piece of Ziploc bag. You could essentially quarter them up and and things like that. You only want to do a half chicken at a time. You got to kind of plan for that. Or you can put all the legs, maybe you're big legs and wings kind of person, and you like to put a lot of sauce on them and that type of stuff. And you want to put all those in one thing and keep the breast separate. However you want to do it. And one thing I forgot to mention here is when we were working on this processing, my wife had mentioned that when we were holding the bird, she goes, "Wait, you don't have cones?" I'm like, "What are you talking about, cones?" She's like, "Well, like the ones that the dogs have on their heads, or cats, when they go to the vet. Well, same kind of cone, except for you stick the chicken in head first into the wide ends. That way their head sticks out the narrow end, and then the cone basically holds their wings, holds their legs in place, so they can't really go anywhere. And then you kind of just have this trough or this like rack built where you have like 6 or 7 cones, and you can just go down with the knife and do one chicken almost like simultaneously right after the other one. And so that's another way you can kind of, get a little bit more gravity on your side maybe to help that blood flow through and drain. But I was like, oh, that'd be pretty easy and convenient. A lot less messy sometimes than the way we do it. And then there's also, as we're going to get into now, the defeathering process. So you have industrial defeather machines, with these rubber fingers basically that are going through and kind of catching the feathers and kind of going through and moving around and kind of depucking the bird. I guess pro there is that it's probably pretty quick, right? I don't know, it probably takes us 15 minutes to pluck a bird by hand.
I suppose maybe like 10, 15. 10,
15 minutes. If you're quick, like Mom, I don't know how many birds she's done in her lifetime, but she's probably over 100. But she's a little bit quicker than most of us. And actually growing up, it kind of seemed like the boys in the family, and there was 6 of us. We always had the job of defeathering, it kind of seemed like. And then once we got done defeathering, we kind of helped trim up, some of the heart and the gizzard and things. But Mom was always kind of the one that would, Mom and then Grandma, my mom's mom, always come down and help too. They'd take out the lungs and all these other things and do all the more messy processing parts. Us siblings weren't always the best at doing that part. So, but this past weekend, my brother Michael and I, we attempted to do a little bit more of the process here. So as far as defeathering, yeah, it's you can basically just pull one feather at a time if you'd like, but the typical method is if you kind of, I don't know, Mom, how would you describe that?
You'd go against the grain of the feather, just like, when you comb your hair, you usually go with your hair down, but you go backwards. And so the feathers come out better. Yeah,
and use your thumb as like the part that's raking against it, so that way you can kind of grab the feathers with the rest of your fingers, and then be able to put that into a bucket to discard or the garbage or whatever.
Yeah, so if you can rub, they come off easier too, more at a time than.
Yep, and then you always got to clean off, the actual wing feathers, if you're wanting to be able to use it as a whole bird. Like sometimes the end of the wings don't have a lot of meat on them, so if you're not really going to use it as a whole bird, you probably could clip that part off and not really lose a whole lot and not have to worry about clipping or pulling as much of those feathers off. So we pull everything off. It's pretty much a naked bird. And I'll post some pictures on my Instagram account so you can kind of see the processes there if you want to check that out. That's at a Homegrown Fam on Instagram. And if you have any questions, shoot me an email too, but I'm sure there's many different YouTube videos about this. And we're not the, this is the way you got to do it kind of method. We're not pros. I mean, maybe semi-pros compared to most, but But this is just the way we do it. There's many ways you can do it. There's probably more efficient ways you can do it. There's probably less messy ways you can do it. This works. And then another thing is to make sure you have a pretty clean area where you can do all this. Whether it's stainless steel sinks and stuff like that in your kitchen, or if you have a place. Usually we go outside because it does kind of make a little bit of a mess. We'll have plywood pieces down or plastic, hard plastic like tabletop pieces or something like that where you can put your animals on, and then you can grab that, spray it out with water, and move on to the next one, so you're not just having a bunch of, it sounds like a murder scene, but you have a bunch of stuff all over the place if you don't keep it tidy. But when you're doing 14 birds, or sometimes I've been growing up, sometimes we did up to the 20s sometime in a day, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, it can be a process, so you may not always want to clean up after yourself, but you do want to make sure you do some good have some good sanitation techniques and things to keep things clean. So we defeather it, and then after that, we take the blowtorch, use a little propane, I think it's like a quart can propane, and a little torch head, and have one person hold the legs up, and the other person kind of going through and burn off any of the little bit of hairs that can be there, right? A little bit smelly. Some people say, like my wife, that's the worst part. It smells so gross. Of course, she's also in the medical profession, like I mentioned too, and it probably smells like cauterizing skin. So, probably doesn't bring back a whole lot of good memories for any time she has experienced that. So what do we do, Mom, after we basically at that point, well, the boy's job's done. So, so what do we do?
So just an interesting thing, when I was a kid, then my mom would have like a big cake pan, and we would pour rubbing alcohol in there instead of using a blowtorch, because I don't know if we actually had one or not then. But and then you just light the rubbing alcohol on fire, and you'd have your little pan of flames, and you would just rotate your chicken around there and take off the hair, and you'd do a few of them at a time before it would die down and start all over. But so there's more than one way to do things.
That sounds kind of like a fun way to do it.
You gotta have to watch your fingers a little bit. So yeah, after you get that done, then you can have some of them cut off the feet. You usually do that kind of by after the yellow part, starts. So kind of like by the knee, what a chicken leg looks like. So, yeah. And there's people that actually use the chicken feet after they clean them for, soups and whatever else. You can see them using even on those cooking channels on TV. So.
Yeah, Google it. You'll find something. If you're a type of person that really wants to utilize the whole chicken, I'm sure you could air dry the feathers and make pillows. You can utilize the feet. Oftentimes we have enough animals, like cats and dogs out here, that will nibble on things, and so it's a nice treat for them sometimes. So that's what we usually do with some of our stuff, is that ends up being cat or dog food snacks. So
yeah. So actually I usually start at the top, or the neck. So you usually have kind of a long neck, and then you take the
chicken's on its back right now with the breasts up.
Yep. So then you take the extra skin kind of like close to the breastbone, and you cut that part about halfway on top, and then you see if you can find that crop, and it's kind of located, close to the
it'd always be
breastbone.
If you're looking at the chicken down, it's always on the left-hand side.
Yep.
Yeah. So left-hand side of the base of the neck.
Yeah.
Basically.
So if you didn't feed them, there won't be a whole lot there, but you can kind of feel the sack, and you kind of got to peel it away from the skin, and pull that out. So if there is any extra feed from the night before or anything, at least you don't have that going through the cavity of the bird, when you're butchering and pulling out the rest of the intestinal tract and stuff.
Yeah.
So.
And part of the reason is that we like to do that so that we don't have to pull it through.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that same time, with your knife, try to get in there and cut the trachea or your air tubes, and then pull that out too with it. So that way you don't have to worry about pulling that all the way through to the chest cavity later too.
Yep. So once you got that out, you can finish cutting off the rest of the skin on your neck, and then pull off that extra skin, because you'll cut the rest of the neck off level with like the wishbone or the start of the breastbone. So then you don't have that sticking in your bag when you're cooking them.
And I guess one thing there is that you want to make sure that you don't cut the skin there too far below the neck, because otherwise you're going to cut too far down, and then once your chicken kind of dries a little bit or starts cooking, it's going to start tightening up on the skin, and next thing you're going to have like your breast meat exposed because you cut too much skin off. Yep. So you want to stay a little higher up the neck, I guess, if you can. Yeah.
So then after you're done with that, well, then you can go towards the bottom end, and you can either start from the belly side or the back side. But if I usually start from the breast side, and you got to go down. So when the breastbone ends, there's that little soft spot, where before their butt is. So you cut that open very carefully, because you don't want to cut any of the intestinal tract on there. So then you cut that, you kind of go down below the pelvic bone.
Yeah, so your incision is going perpendicular to the direction of the chicken, right there.
Yep.
So when you cut, you're cutting perpendicular, kind of slice going from like a couple inches below that where that soft part starts. But yet, the closer you can remain to the butthole without getting too close, it's probably ideal, so you keep more skin there.
Yeah.
So perpendicular cut, and then after you start getting to the point where you're kind of over the legs, and you start cutting down then, right?
Yep. So then you cut down towards the pelvic bone where that is at there. So you just cut it open enough, so you can just see the intestines there. And then I usually flip it over so you can cut the tail. You kind of got to get in between the bone. And then you can cut around it so you got an opening now. And then you can flip it back over. And then you can stick your hand in above, below the breastbone and above all the guts. And then you just kind of try and get, above where the heart is. And then just pull her all out.
Yep. And so one of the unique things about chickens and other, most birds, have gizzards, I'm pretty sure. So, is that one of the things that they pull out is this gizzard, and it's kind of like, I don't even know how big it is. Size of a lemon or a lime you buy in the store.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, and so this is like the only thing in there that's kind of like hard, and it basically, for a chicken, it's basically its stomach, because typically chickens don't really have a stomach, they have this gizzard. And so the food goes from the crop, goes down into the gizzard, and then this gizzard is basically this big massive muscle that's like a circular form. It has this pocket in the middle. The pheasants on the side of the road, they're picking at rocks and things and swallowing them, so that way it's something hard that can rotate around in the gizzard to help pulverize their food. And so chickens will also like to pick at rocks once in a while and get something hard in there to rotate around and kind of just help squish up their food, basically, is what that gizzard function is. And so you pull the gizzard out, and then that's one person's job usually is to cut all the gizzards and trim up the hearts and things like that. So how do you go about trimming up the gizzard? It's kind of an art, really.
It is, and Nora did an awesome job of doing it too. Because you take the side of the gizzard and you cut carefully so you can just see there's a little white lining on the inside of the gizzard. So you get through the white lining, but you don't want to get through the yellow, because the yellow lining is where the food all is. So you get through the white part, and then you just kind of pull it in half, I would say, or pull it apart. And so you'll have that yellow sack with the food in it still inside. And you got to kind of peel it away from the white lining on the inside.
You're kind of almost flipping it inside out.
Yeah.
So once you get past, you cut around all this muscle, so you see this little white part, and then you try to pull it apart a little bit rather than cutting it. Because if you do cut through it, the next thing you're gonna have chicken feed or food all over the place. So you try to basically flip it inside out, and then the pole will look similar to the crop. It's kind of a sack away from all the muscle. The membranous sack that you can pull away from the muscle, and then it's little baggie full of food that it had from a couple of days prior, and throw that away, and then you got this muscular tissue you can use and eat. And I'm not usually a fan of the gizzards or the hearts, but
you can pickle them.
That's right. You said you tried that, didn't you?
I did. I did that once or twice.
Yeah, how'd that turn out?
Not too bad, if you like pickled stuff.
Yeah, there's not too many people in our family that like to eat them. I'll eat the heart occasionally, but my dad, he pretty much is the gizzard eater. And then I think my sister might enjoy them once in a while too. So, but you can always just skip that part and feed to the cats if you're, not interested in eating any of the internal meat. My wife Nora, she's like anything internal, she doesn't really like to touch. So, and then you also have the liver and stuff in there that we try to collect. And the liver is that usually just cat food for us?
Well, sometimes they'll eat it, but cats need to eat too. So.
Yeah.
But sometimes I've had liver pate before, so you can get creative with it if you want to, but it all depends on the individual.
Yeah. I think Mom, you put them in little quart bags and freeze them, wouldn't you? And then you thaw them up for the winter time and give them to the cats when they don't have quite as much to eat. Yeah.
Or sometimes if you stick some of this stuff inside the chicken when you broil it might give it more flavor too.
Oh, yeah, sure.
When you're roasting your chicken.
Mm-hmm.
Or some people use it for their stuffing. If you chop up your giblets is what you call it, yeah.
Yep. One part that you gotta be careful about when cutting up or detaching the liver away from everything else is that there's this long, cylindrical, green-looking, and I don't know if it's the pancreas or if it's like the equivalent of like our spleen or something, but it's all kind of green-looking. And that stuff, I think, is pretty acidic and kind of foul, what's ever inside that. So when you're cutting off the liver, you don't want to make sure you don't cut that with it, because then, and especially get that on your meat and stuff. Mom said it can actually make your meat taste a little different.
Yeah, bitter. That's what my mom always said. Don't cut that because it'll make the meat taste bitter.
Yeah, so you don't want to get that on anything else. I mean, that's a general rule for any of the intestines and things. You don't want to.
Yeah.
Anything you accidentally cut can definitely smell, and you don't want to get any of those juices or liquids onto any other part of the bird.
Just have to wash it good.
Yeah. Yep. And one thing we haven't really done, because sometimes you need the fingernails in order to get all that stuff out. If you want to, I'm sure you can wear rubber gloves because it seems like it smells like my hands can smell like intestines for a day or two. It seems like after I don't know,
or just raw meat. I mean,
yeah.
The fingernails work good to get the lungs out.
Yeah, so you're kind of pulling things out. You got the heart out. You detach the lungs. You got the gizzard. Someone's cutting that up. And on the hearts, you usually just cut off like a half inch off the top, where it's kind of a little more fatty and kind of more veiny.
More the veins come out.
Yeah, more of the veins, and artery type stuff is at the top. You cut that part off, and then you have these little tiny hearts left over. So then after that, you're able to pull out most of everything else, but one of the harder parts is getting the lungs out.
Yeah, lungs. Kidneys, they're usually stuck way back in the, by the backbone back there. So,
in general, that's kind of up to your personal preference, right? Because there's a little bit left over in there. It's all parts that you don't really eat usually. Granted, it could be causing some juices that soak into other parts of your bird, but up to you, I guess, how clean you want to make it.
And if you cut them up too, you'll be able to see that better later too, True, and you can clean them up afterwards too. But if you leave them whole, it's just a little, you just got to look inside good and say take the hose and you can spray, high pressure spray in there. That'll help clean it out too.
Mm-hmm. And then after that, you have headless, legless piece of chicken that you typically would, if you saw it vacuum sealed, you'd think it was from the store. Then before you just can seal it up and put it in the freezer right away, it's usually a process, right? So you got one done, you got all the insides removed to one chicken, and then you got to do another chicken. Even though I was just helping remove the crop and kind of opening up the cavity, and then I kind of slide it over Mom and she'd do the rest of it. And so it's kind of a little bit streamlined that way, kind of all doing the same tasks or simple tasks and kind of doing it over and over. As you get one done, Mom wants to go back and kind of look through it in the kitchen one more time just to make sure everything's out of there. But you want to cool down your bird. Kind of like anytime you go hunting, if you're hunting venison or deer, you always want to let that meat cool down a little bit first before you cut it up kind of thing. This we like to. But if it's too hot, it can spoil too. So if it's like a really hot fall season for deer hunting, then you want to make sure you cut up your deer sooner than later too, because you don't want it to spoil. So usually what we'll do then is basically take water from the well water hydrants outside, which is pretty cool water, and put them in pails or that container that you're boiling water in earlier. Well, you could use that one and put the bird inside there and fill it up with nice cold water and kind of do that a couple times to keep them cool and get them cooled down to help keep your meat. What about after that, Mom? Then what?
Well, after you got them all checked over and stuff and cooled down, and they're ready to kind of just let them drain and get your bags ready and put them in.
Label your bags, year, date it, and
yep.
There you go. So that's kind of what we do for processing our meat birds. I don't know. Did you forget anything? One part I just thought about on my notes here, I said pin feathers. And as a kid, pin feathers, P-I-N, were the worst. And it's like you get this nice little, you pull the technique, drag your thumb across, but then they have this layer of pin feathers. And it's always the ones that are like, a centimeter, half centimeter long that kind of stick out. And so then you got to go back through and pick those off again. And it's a process. It doesn't always come off so easy, them feathers. So you have to flip it over multiple times, catch all the feathers. But that part was always not so fun as a child, I remember. But it wasn't too bad doing that yesterday or today. So
yeah, usually the broiler birds are pretty good for not having too many pin feathers. But if you have like a rooster that you got with your egg-laying chickens or whatever, they might have more pin feathers.
Yeah, and I guess oftentimes if you're homesteading, you're like, well, can't I just get a bunch of egg-laying, dual-purpose, get your, what are some of the dual-purpose breeds, Mom?
Buff Orpingtons are a dual-purpose.
Rhode Island Reds, are those also
they're more of a laying chicken, but...
Plymouth Rocks, those are kind of fun.
Yeah, them are kind of dual-purpose.
Yeah, so there's quite a few different ones that are supposed to be good for meat and for eggs. So you can look online and go to the Hoover's Hatchery and they'll have layer breed section, and they'll have a meat bird breeding area and whatnot. So, if you're a homesteader, you say you want to just have some chickens, both for meat and for laying eggs. Like, well, then if I get extra roosters, I'll just butcher the roosters, or every 3 years, maybe I'll butcher the hens and kind of, revitalize your coop and get some new ones. That's fine too. This will be a slightly smaller bird. Same process and everything. Yeah, but they'll be a little bit more. It's a little bit harder when they're smaller because your hands can't quite fit in the cavity as well either. So maybe a little bit harder to clean. So them birds, you might be better off parting into pieces and doing it that way for some of them older hens that you use for eggs initially. But the same process goes for ducks, pretty much. A couple little differences in that, ducks are meant to be in water. So how does the soaking process change for ducks?
So you pretty much cannot scald them.
Can't dip them in the bucket. They're resistant.
Yep. So you just have to either dry pluck them or you have to take the skin off. When you freeze them, you have to make sure that you use good bags so then they don't get freezer burnt.
Like they don't have the skin to kind of buffer that.
Right.
Yeah. Yep. And so, dry plucking is like going through your down pillow and just pulling little feathers out. It's then they float since they're not wet and weighted down.
Oh, yeah.
There's feathers everywhere, but otherwise, you just debreast them and take the thighs out and do that with ducks that way too. So a little bit more difficult with ducks, but we've done that in the past too with some of the 4-H animals that we've had throughout the years. So, but I think that's what we have for you guys here today in terms of processing our meat chickens, or butchering our meat chickens. If you have any questions, shoot me an email at homegrownfam@gmail.com. Post some pictures here on the Instagram at a homegrown family or homegrown fam. Otherwise, thanks, Mom, for jumping on here and talking about the chickens.
You're welcome.
All right, we'll see you, everybody.